On this next step of practice, we're going to be using hatching and cross hatching to show value change using our charcoal. Starting out in this first area here, we're going to be using hatching to match each of the values in this value scale. So I'm starting out with my 6B pencil, and with hatching, we're basically just using lines that are parallel next to each other to create our value change. So areas that are darker, such as our first section here, you're going to want to make sure that your lines are overlapping and closer together. And then as we go closer towards the lightest areas, we're going to start to spread our lines further and further apart and lessen the pressure of the charcoal pencil. So with hatching, you definitely want to overlap, add multiple layers as you're working to show that value change. So here I'm just not pressing as hard, but I want it to still be a darker value with my lines. And then at this point, I'm going to switch to the 4B pencil so I can start to see my lines even more as I'm working. And I'm just using those vertical lines next to each other to match the values. And then for this fourth section, I'm starting to leave a little bit of space in between some of these lines so that that white of the paper is going to mix with the black of the charcoal to create more of that gray value. Level 5, I'm going to start to spread these even further apart. And then switching for the last one here to the 2B pencil, where I'm really using a light pressure with the charcoal and spreading these lines further apart. All right, so moving down into this next area, this is creating a gradient with hatching. So that just is taking our values here and blending them together. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the 6B first and then fade into the 4B. So overlapping and starting to lessen the pressure, spread these further apart. And then I'm going to move into my 4B pencil here. So this is going to allow me to see my lines a little bit more. I'm starting to spread those further and further apart so that I can see the white of the paper coming through in some of the spaces. And then I'm going to switch to my 2B for these lightest values as I fade into my highlight, because it is the easiest to use the lightest amount of pressure with the 2B pencil. And that's going to fade into my lightest value. And I like to take my 2B at the end and just kind of go through with the second layer, make sure that everything is blended and smooth to get to that darkest value at the end. So now I have my gradient with hatching. I'm going to move down to cross hatching next. With cross hatching, I'm going to start out the same way. So I'm going to go in with hatching first. Now that I have all of my vertical lines here, I'm going to go across it in a different direction. You can go across it in more than just two directions. You can do a third or fourth, depending on how many layers you need to get to achieve the accurate value change that you're looking for. So there's my fade with the cross hatching, and then I'm going to move down into the gradient and do the same thing. So I'm going to go in with the darkest values using hatching, fade it out first, and then go over top with my lines going the opposite direction. And for the last step on this, we're going to be using cross hatching to fill in the values on this cylinder here. So start out and label the values, lining them up with 1 through 7 from our value scales above, and make sure that you are including all of those values as you shade this in. So basically creates a gradient going from dark to light across here, and then a lighter gradient from medium tones to a highlight on this front panel here, and then the shadow underneath. So I'm going to start out with the body here of the cylinder, and I'm going to be following the form or the contour of the outside of my cylinder in order to emphasize the form. So the great thing about cross hatching or just using hatching on final projects is it can really create more dimension in your object by emphasizing the form if you're following the form of those objects correctly. So as I'm shading this, I'm going to start out and follow the form or the contour of the outside here and just bring my lines going horizontally across. So I'm following the contour of this part with my first line. I'm going to start with my 6B pencil down at the bottom to get those darkest values in first, and then fade up into my 4 and then 3. So I'm going to go across with those hatching lines first. Next, I'm going to move into the cross hatching lines. So I already did my lines going this direction, so I want to still follow the form. So instead of drawing my lines completely straight and vertical like this, I'm going to curve them with the contour or the shape of this part of the sphere. So this outside circle here, and I'm going to continue that, and it's the same shape on the end as well. So I'm continuing that going all the way across. If I was doing straight lines, that would really flatten out the shape of this cylinder. So I want to emphasize the shape with my lines. So I'm starting at the bottom where it's the darkest, and instead of having my lines come all the way across, it's that highlight in the middle. So I want them to stop before I get to that highlight. So I'm going to draw some of them just kind of coming up, stopping about where that highlight is. And then I'll do a few layers at different heights. So I'm bringing this all the way up. And then I'm going to do another layer that maybe stops about halfway up those lines that I have there already. And then I'm continuing with these lines being a little bit shorter. They're still curved following the outside form. And then I'm going to move down and do one more row here that is the shortest, so that these are all ending at different places to create that smooth blend. And this is really emphasizing the darkest value, making it darker as I'm working. So now I'm going to start at the top where it's a little bit darker and have my lines curving down towards that highlight again, but not going all the way through it because I want to leave that as my lightest value. So I'm still following the curve of this outside, so I'm not flattening out the shape, and I'm drawing a row of the longest lines. So again, they're coming all the way to where the highlight is, but not going through it. And then I'm going to do a row of some shorter lines to start to darken things. And the last area is this part of the cylinder here, so this flat part. It's more of a medium tone on the top and fades into my highlight that's white down here. So I'm going to start out, this part is actually flat, so I'm going to be drawing straight flat lines going different directions. Since this part of the cylinder is not curved, it's more two-dimensional. So that's where you want to use your straight lines, is if it is a two-dimensional object. So I'm going to bring these lines coming down from the top where it's darker up here, and I'm not bringing them all the way past my highlight. So I want to leave that area white. So I have these all kind of ending at different lengths around this general area. And then I'm going to do a row of shorter lines. So now I have my lines coming from the one direction. Now I need to pick a second direction to cross over to create the lighter or the cross hatching coating on top. So I'm going to bring these in coming this way, and I'm starting to fade those out as I get down towards my highlight. I'm actually going to come in a second way, or a third direction as well over here. I'm going to go over it a few times just to really emphasize that darkest value and the fade into my highlight. And then if you want, you can go in with the shadow down here that would be the darkest at the bottom, along the bottom, and then fading into the lighter value around the outside of the shadow.